The first thing I will talk about the high-level overview of EVFTA and its impacts on the logistics industry in Vietnam. Then I will move to the second section to review about how VAT and withholding tax to be applicable to logistic company in Vietnam. I have few slides suggesting some advice for the logistic company in Vietnam, and we have one slide to update you how ASEM can help you with the taxation in Vietnam. So the first section I want to go to the EVFTA and its impacts on the logistics industry in Vietnam. Firstly, I want to just summarize about the milestone this year, 2020, about the progress of EVFTA. You can see that in the 12th February this year, the European Parliament already rectified the EVFTA. 30th March, European Council also approved the EVFTA. The 8th of June, National Assembly of Vietnam formally approved the application of the EVFTA, and last month, 1st August, the EVFTA came into effect in EU and Vietnam. So I will, because the topic this afternoon only focus on the logistics industry, I will go a bit into detail about the commitment in the logistics industry in Vietnam and in the EU's. I also talking about the challenges from Vietnam perplexity about such commitment. I have few slides mentioning about general commitment regarding the logistic opening policy and the tariff elimination, and also non-tariff barrier from EVFTA. Okay, this slide you can see I will summary at the high level what Vietnam and the EU commitment for the logistic opening. From Vietnam side. Vietnam government agreed that they will provide the opening similar to EU countries, similar to what already agree with the WTO, because the EU also the member of the WTO. So of course, the EU investor specifically in the industries also receive at least similar favor treatment like what the WTO country member receive. There's also from Vietnam side, there are also wider opening and additional openings in several types of logistics services, particularly in the sea transport and the supporting services in the sea transport. And second area, a wider opening in air freight, and the third thing area is supporting services for own traffic vehicles. From the EU also committed in the EVFTA to open logistic services for Vietnam's company, including two group of content that you can see in my slide. The first group is the general responsibilities applying for own investment activity in the transport boundary service supply, including logistics services. The second group of content is the specific responsibility applying for investment activity and the transboundary services in the transport by sea. You know that the concept of logistics is the one very broad, and we use to mention many activities inside. So in this slide and the next slide, I will go into the specific area that in EVFTA, both Vietnam and EU agree a widened opening to the logistic activities. So firstly, I will discuss the first thing the first area I will discuss will be sea transport and the supporting services for the sea transport. In that category, I will mention first about the domestic sea transport. Both WTO and EVFTA, Vietnam still keep the domestic markets for the Vietnam shipping line. But in EVFTA, there are wider openings when Vietnam government agreed that between the Quy Nhơn and Khai Met Thị Vải port, Vietnam government will allow the transport of the empty containers and the supply of cargo consolidation to the EU enterprise. And after 5 years from the first year of effectiveness, Vietnam government will allow the transport of empty containers on own routes. In the area of companies operating ships with the Vietnamese flags, only joint venture required. Under WTO, the foreign party can join in the joint venture, but the foreign capital is only allowed from 49% or less. But in EVFTA, for joining into the joint venture operating the ships with the Vietnamese flags, the foreign capital can be allowed from 70% or less. So you can see that there are a big jump from 49% under the WTO to 70% under the EVFTA. For the next sub category, I want to discuss that the other sea transport. You can see under WTO's only Vietnam only allow international shipping services through the border, but in the EVFTA, Vietnam allows cross-border services to Vietnamese customers without limitation. The next sub criteria in maritime agency. Under WTO, Vietnam have no commitment on this area, but in the EVFTA, Vietnam agreed that there will be no limitation for the cross-border supplying services. And for the joint venture in Vietnam, in the maritime agency, the foreign capital can be allowed from 49% or less. The next slide, very interesting. The next slide, I will discuss about the air freight services. So in the air freight services, I will discuss about two sub criteria. The first one is airport ground handling services. Both WTO and EVFTA, Vietnam will not allow the EU enterprise to enter into the aircraft maintenance and cleaning, survey transport, airport services, and air navigation services. But the good thing is that under the EVFTA, it's agreed that Vietnam may agree that in case Vietnam open the market to the private sector, then EU service suppliers will be allowed to enter into a joint venture with the foreign capital limitation after 5 years from the year opening the market to the private sector. Then the foreign capital of the EU investor will be allowed from 49% or less, and 3 years later, the foreign capital can be increased from 49% to 51%. In the next sub criteria is in-flight catering services. Under WTO, you can see that no commitment from Vietnam, but under EVFTA, Vietnam's agree that there will be no limitation for cross-border supplying services, and for joint venture in Vietnam in the in-flight catering services, the foreign capital can be allowed from 49% or less. I have the next slide summary about the supporting services for own traffic vehicle. For handling services, you can see that under the WTO, there are no commitment from Vietnam government, but under the EVFTA, Vietnam government agreed that there will be no limitation for cross-border supplying services. And for joint venture in Vietnam, the foreign capital can be allowed from 49% or less. The ranging services, no commitment from Vietnam government under WTO, but under EVFTA, there will be no limitation for cross-border supplying services. And similarly, joint venture in Vietnam, for joint venture in Vietnam, foreign capitals will be also allowed from 49%, and after 5 years from effecting date of joint venture, then 51%, the foreign capital can be go up to 51%. Okay, that's the particular wider opening policy for EU supplier under the EVFTA. I will move to the next slide. I go a bit in more detail about commitment in certain fields that affect to the logistic companies. I will go one by one about the general commitment regarding the logistic industry, and after that I move to the tariff elimination and the non-tariff barriers. So for the general commitment regarding logistics, Vietnam agreed that the internal secondment from the EU country to the commercial presence in Vietnam will be allowed. It means that the internal secondment of expert technician from the EU country to either joint venture, 100% foreign-owned company, rep office will be allowed. Talking about individual EU individual coming into Vietnam for logistics provision, it means that individual come in as a private entity or come in under the individual capacity to provide the logistics services. There are no commitment from Vietnamese government for that movement. They're talking about, I think the second line talking about the individual just come in to provide individual service relating to logistics. So that's the no commitment. Setting up the rep office and branches in Vietnam, only rep office is allowed. I think under WTO, that's already agreed, and because of the fact that EU is a member of WTO, so of course you can set up the rep office in Vietnam, and I believe many of you are aware that the rep office are only allowed to do the marketing, the market research, the study, the preparation for investment, but rep office itself cannot get involved in the income generating activity in Vietnam. For the favorable nation treatment, whether the EU enterprise can be invest in the transport, maritime services, port management. So you can see on the right column, that one is still not committed by Vietnam government. Okay, I move to the tariff elimination. I'm talking first about the Vietnam commitment. I believe that in the last couple of months in certain presentation, you may already see the roadmap for tariff elimination. So I just have one slide to summarize about that. So if from the effective date, it means that last month, August 2020, for the importation, Vietnam will agree that they will eliminate 48.5% of the tariff line, equally to about more than 64% of the export volume to Vietnam. In the year 7, Vietnam will agree that they will eliminate up to 91.8% of the tariff line. So it will be equally 97.1% of the EU export volume to Vietnam. And from the year 10, starting from this year, Vietnam will eliminate about 98.3% of the tariff lines. It's equally to almost 99.8% of the EU export volume to Vietnam. So you can see that the goods imported from EU will be cheaper and cheaper starting from now, and much more cheaper from 10 years starting from this year. For exportation, Vietnam also agreed that Vietnam will eliminate the export duty on the product sold to the EU within 15 years. As you're already aware that many of export products to the other country in Vietnam already subject to zero rated export duty. Of course, Vietnam still keep its right for certain protected commodities like silicon sand, crude oil, coal. Talking about this line, I'm talking about the EU commitment. So immediately from last month, EU agreed that the EU member will eliminate 85.5% of that tariff line, equal to 70.3% of Vietnam export volume to EU. And 7 years, starting from this year, the EU member country will eliminate 99.2% of the tariff lines, equally to 99.7% of Vietnam export volume to the EU. So you can see that the tariff elimination in EU faster than from Vietnam. For exportation, EU agreed that not apply any taxes and fee on the export to Vietnam. I have just one more slide mention about non-tariff barrier before I move to the new content. So the technical barrier to trade TBT, Vietnam, you can see in my slide that Vietnam has agreed to review technical regulation with a view of increasing the consolidation, the convergence with relevant international standards. For sanitary and phytosanitary measure, Vietnam also commit to apply the same import requirement to similar product coming from own EU member countries. For other non-tariff barrier on custom licensing procedure, Vietnam agreed to amplify and improve the discipline on the custom licensing procedure, marking the origin. There are new guidance on the rule of origin for the EVFTA. You may know that recently the Ministry of Trade and Industries and Ministry of Finance already issues new circular about the rule of origin. Okay, so what are the opportunities for the logistics industry in Vietnam? Of course, with the EVFTA, you can see that the demand is increased, so there will be expansion of the foreign trade with the new EVFTA. Of course, due to the COVID-19, things may slow down a bit from what people are expecting, but I think it will soon to get recover next year. Then you also can see that because the tariff elimination, there will be the reduction of the import and export tariff, and the flow of goods will be bigger, stronger, and faster. The EVFTA also bring the efficiency improvement. The government in all relevant country will get the improvement with the new logistic legal framework. EVFTA also bring the benefit that the imported good, the exported goods, the price will be reduced. It will lower production and the least cost in many sectors. The EVFTA also, you know, that improve the quality. Let's say from the Vietnam side, many Vietnam enterprises will learn EU experience, learn the management skill, and they will very soon to see the quality-based competition. Stronger access to the EU market. Commitments of there will be stronger commitment of the EU and Vietnam on the logistics industry opening. What will be the challenges for logistics industry? Of course, from Vietnam, you can see that the competition will be more intense. So, because more EU logistics service provider will get access to the Vietnamese market, so the competition will be higher, and the standards of operation also higher, because there will be new requirement for service quality, reliability, stable and controllable supply chain. And EVFTA provide a rare opportunity to access in the EU market, but the EU market is also a difficult market because many big companies already running their operation there. I just mentioned about the high requirement of the service quality and the very comprehensive legal binding requirements. So Vietnamese entity, logistic entity also need to learn more about the legal requirement in the EU market. Okay, so now I go to the main content of my presentation today. I will talking about the domestic VAT and the withholding tax in Vietnam. Before I go into the details, what I want to say that logistics is a very complicated industry. You have the shipping line, you have the airline, you have the forwarder, you have the many activity inside. So with the timing about let's say less than 1 hour, I just summarize the high level tax treatment and give you some idea and insight about the risky area that's local logistic and entities may facing during the applying VAT and withholding tax in Vietnam. So the first thing, talking about the tax, I buy on certain regulation, because you know that why I want to list down the regulation in that slide, because next year it's expected that many regulations will be changed, and we may need another update about how the tax, VAT and withholding tax to be applied to the industry. But for the time being, I buy on certain commercial regulation. I buy on the new law of tax administration already took effective from 1st July this year. For VAT, there are many regulations, but I buy on the consolidated document. It's not a legal circular, but consolidate a number of circular up to the end of year 2019. Foreign contractor tax, withholding tax. Of course, there are only one circular operating at this moment, so I buy on the circular 103. This presentation after the webinar, I understand that from ASEM website and also the Eurojam, there also there will be an upload of the file, so you can see more detail about regulation. So the first thing I want to discuss about how VAT will be imposed on the revenue that the Vietnamese logistic company to receive. When I'm talking about the Vietnamese logistics companies, I mean the local and also the FDI logistic company operating in the Vietnamese territory. So usually a logistic company, you will receive certain, of course, if you charge or you bill the Vietnamese customer, 10% VAT will be applied. But if you receive certain revenue from overseas, from the overseas importer, from overseas logistic company, from, let's say you receive the revenue from the other country, so how VAT to be applied? And I just list down in the high level what kind of revenue stream a Vietnamese logistic company may receive in Vietnam. They can receive the freight charge, they can receive some surcharge relating to the freight for international and domestic transportation. There are also a number of handling services charge that local, the Vietnamese logistic company can receive from overseas entity. Talking about handling services, I mean many things inside, like the document, the THC, the custom clearance document, the DO, so quite a number of handling service, including in the second point here. You also can receive from overseas for certain warehousing services that your company have the overseas client or partner to complete the services. Apart from the logistics services charge, Vietnamese logistic company also can receive a profit share from overseas. You also can receive the revenue collected on behalf of the overseas supplier or customer. And if you're running for certain activity, if you're running as an agent, you also can receive the commission at agent function. So that is, I just list down the 6 revenue stream that the Vietnamese logistic company may receive from overseas. I not mention about the revenue you receive from Vietnamese customer, and if you receive revenue from the Vietnamese customer, 10% VAT, will be clearly to be imposed on your revenue. What I want to mention in that slide, if you receive revenue from overseas, including either EU or non-EU client, entity, partner, so what is the risk of the VAT? So that's a six kind of revenue stream that you can receive from overseas entities. And the question here, how domestic VAT to be applied? I have I list down the number of revenue stream, and in the right column you can see two columns. The first column, I will answer you whether that revenue stream received from overseas subject to the VAT or not. And the second, what is the VAT rate? And because when we're talking about the revenue stream from overseas, there are many factors affecting how the VAT rate to be applied. I will discuss in the next slide. So I just want to summarize at the high level in that slide that whether the revenue will subject to the VAT and what is the possible VAT rate to be applied from that revenue. So the first thing, international freight and the surcharge. So the first column will answer you if you receive that from overseas, then the revenue will subject to the VAT. But if it's merely the international freight and the surcharge also relating to international freight, then the VAT rate could be 0%. Of course, if you work in the industry, you already know that the surcharge consider that a part of international freight. The government only agree for about 11 surcharge can be treated at the same nature with international freight. But we will discuss that later. So the next thing, if you receive the revenue just mainly relevant to domestic freight, of course that revenue is subject to the VAT, and the applicable rate can be either 0 or 10%. If you can prove that it's relevant to international freight, that's zero rated. But if that's merely to domestic, the freight for the domestic transportation, there are no connection to international freight, then 10% will be applied. Of course, under the Vietnamese tax regime, it's agreed that if domestic, you know that the domestic freight can be considered as international freight if you selling or your foreign partner selling a bucket to bringing the good out of Vietnam, and during that bucket, including the domestic transportation, and in that case, domestic can be treated as part of international. So it depends on how the contract structure and what is the values, the chain of the transportation, and the VAT rate can be different. Handling services is will subject to the VAT. If you receive the revenue for that, will subject to the VAT. But if the handling services attached to the goods to be exported out of the country, 0% will be applied. But if you cannot prove that, then 10% VAT will be applied. Handling services conducted and performed outside of Vietnam, it will not subject to the VAT, and no VAT will be applied on that. And handling services in bonded warehouse for overseas client, it will be subject to the VAT, and it depends on how you use the bonded warehouse. You use the bonded warehouse for exporting the goods out of the country, or you use the bonded warehouse to import the goods to selling the good back to the country. The VAT can be different. It can be either 0% or 10%. Warehousing similar to what I just explained. It depends on how you use the warehousing for the good to be exported or the good to be imported, and whether you get the license, whether the Vietnamese logistic company get the license to run the warehousing activity. The VAT rate can be either 0 or 10%. And of course, the warehousing also subject to the VAT. The other income that Vietnamese logistics company may receive at a profit share, that's a very risky, the tax risky area in Vietnam. Because let's say in your industry, you just think that that's either the profit share or the loss share, but in the Vietnamese tax point of view, they think that the profits you receive should be relevant to certain services that you perform to the overseas buyer. So if you perform the service, you perform and you consume the service in Vietnam, 10% will be applied. If you can prove that the service connected to the exported goods, then euro rated will be applied. Then the next line relating to the revenue collected on behalf of overseas entities, it's also subject to the VAT, and again 0% or 10% will be applied, depend on the nature of the revenue. Agent commission, you know that, let's say if you are the agent for shipping line and you offer the phrase following the fixed price subjected offer by the shipping line, then the commission will not subject to VAT. But if you are the agent for foreign entity for other services, it's not relating to international transportation, and the agent will be subject to VAT at 10%. So I think at this moment, quite a number of you will be a little bit confused when you see the right column about applicable VAT rate, because I just mentioned either euro rated and 10%, and the gap between euro rated and 10% is, I think, very big. If you are euro rated, it's great because you don't have to pay the output VAT. You still can claim back the input VAT, but if you have to pay 10% VAT on that, then whether the overseas payer, they agree to pay 10% to you, or you need to, that collect the money, then work back what is the 10% you have to pay to the government. So what makes the difference between euro rated and 10%? I will explain that in the next slide. And I just mentioned from my first explanation to you, logistics is just a concept that we are using to mention many activities inside. So the domestic VAT will be very much depend on the nature of the service. So what makes the difference if we go into the nature of the service? Of course, you know that, let's say if you're talking about your service to be attached to the good to be exported overseas, you should keep in hand the documentation that you can show to the local tax authority, explain about that. So documentation to prove that the service exporters is very important. If you don't have such kind of documentation, there are no way the documentation mentioned that the service to be exported, then you cannot apply euro rates. And for the service to be exported, the current VAT regulation in Vietnam require that you need to prove the service to be consumed outside of Vietnam. In the past, it required that you need to prove the services need to perform and consume outside of Vietnam. Recently, the regulation already agreed to take out the place of performance. They still mention about the place of consumption. So you need to move to prove the place of consumption. You only can the only time you can prove the place of consumption outside of Vietnam, then the chance to apply zero rated will be high. The fee breakdown. Let's say if you receive the revenue with many fee component inside, and you cannot break down what relevant to the freight, international freight, what is relevant to the surcharge that can be treated as international freight, and what is the handling service, what happened in the other country, what to be conducted in Vietnam. Then if you cannot break down, then the highest VAT rate will be applied. Let's say if the fee including the freight and certain services performed in Vietnam, but you cannot break down, then 10% will be applied. Surcharge, I just mentioned that currently tax regulation in Vietnam only allow 11 items can be treated similar, the treatment can be similar to the freight, and zero rated will be applied, but the rest will be subject to 10%. Bonded warehouse, for apply zero rated for the service relating to the bonded warehouse, Vietnamese logistics company need to get permission to run the service within the bonded warehouse, and the service need to connect attached to the good to be exported. So I have the summary here. When you, as a Vietnamese logistic company, when you receive a revenue from overseas, what is an area that local tax authority will be challenge you, and if you cannot prove the fact inside, usually 10% VAT rate will be applied. But if you can prove that it's relevant to export service, then zero rated will be applied. Let's say for the freight charge, they will ask the documentation, they will ask the master bill, the house bill, the manifest, they will asking bill uploading, they will ask quite a number of correspondence to see that that's really a freight relating to international transportation. And they will asking you about the fee breakdown to see what is the freight, what is the surcharge, what is the approved surcharge to be zero rated, and what is the surcharge not zero rated. Handling services, again, tax authority want to see the document to see what is the nature, where the service to be consumed, and whether the service relating to the bonded warehouse or not. If relating to the bonded warehouse, whether you have the license, you register the license to provide the services relating to bonded warehouse. Warehousing, the same. If relating to bonded warehouse, they want to see that your company get a permission to provide such kind of warehousing services. For the profit share, they also want to know the nature of the profit to be shared to your entity, where what activity that the profit relating to, whether it's relating to the services performed and consumed outside of Vietnam, or it's relating mainly to the services that you perform in Vietnam that benefit to the foreign entity, and they need to share such kind of profit to you. They also want to see the fee breakdown for the agent commission. They want to know you are the agent for the shipping line, or you are the agent for other logistic activities. So to tell you an answer, VAT, if your revenue stream subject to the VAT, whether you can entitle to zero rated or 10%, you need to base on a number of facts to analyze, to do more deeply research to get an answer about VAT. And with the limited time, without the facts provided, I can not apply immediately whether in your particular situation you will subject to zero rated or you will subject to 10% VAT. But bear that in mind, that is the approach that you need to think about, you need to consider about when you receive the revenue from overseas. Okay, now I move to the next slide. I move to the slide talking about the withholding taxes in Vietnam. So in the last couple slides, I mentioned about the revenue that you receive. In the next 3 or 4 slides, I mentioned about the payment you pay out to the overseas entity. So the previous slide I mentioned about the revenue, and now I mentioned about expenses. So as a logistic company, for certain cases, you need to pay out to foreign supplier, customer, partner outside of Vietnam. You also need to pay out, let's say, the freight charge and the surcharge. You also need to pay out the handling service charge that foreign entity have you to conduct us outside of Vietnam. You need to pay the delivery charge, and you also need to pay out some loss share. The profit share I mentioned about the profit you receive, but if the group they have some loss, you need to share certain loss. You need to pay out to share the loss. For certain cases, the FDI entity, FDI logistic company in Vietnam, you also need to pay the management fee to the HQ, the parent company. In certain cases, you may pay the royalty for the software you are using in Vietnam. So if you have certain expenses paid outside Vietnam, so how withholding tax to be applied? In this slide, I just summary what I just mentioned, that Vietnamese logistic enterprises, for certain cases, you not only receive the revenue, you also need to pay out for foreign entity, either the foreign logistic entity or the overseas importer or the partner or the HQ. So the quite a number of payment you need to pay out, as I already mentioned in last slide. So in that slide, I will tell you about the withholding tax rate. If you are operating in Vietnam for a while, you know that withholding tax in Vietnam, that's the type of tax. There are 2 components inside, that's the VAT and CIT. So withholding tax is just a general name of tax, but inside the tax there are 2 components, VAT and CIT rate. It means that when you pay a gross amount to the overseas entity, you need to withhold VAT and CIT and pay the withheld amount to the tax authority. So some of the withholding tax rate to be applied, I just list down in the in that slide. You can see the 2 column in the right side to see what is the withholding tax rate to be applied. Let's say for outbound international freight and surcharge, VAT rate withholding tax. When I'm talking about withholding tax, VAT rate will be 0 rated, CIT will be 2%, and of course you know that for certain services you can apply double tax treaty to get exemption about the CIT rate. For domestic freight, if it's not connected to international freight, then withholding tax will be, VAT will be 3%, CIT will be 2%. Handling services in Vietnam, VAT will be 5%, CIT will be 5%. Handling services performed outside of Vietnam do not subject to withholding tax. Outbound mail services, usually VAT will be 5%, CIT will be 5%. Loss share to overseas entity, if you can rule that, that relating to the server consume outside of Vietnam, perform consume outside of Vietnam, there will be no taxes. But you cannot, if you cannot rule that, if you cannot, you just say the loss for the server perform and consume outside of Vietnam. If you have no paperwork to prove that, then withholding tax will be apply, and there will be 5% VAT and 5% corporate tax on the gross amount you sell to the other entity. If you have to pay management fee to the HQ, then withholding tax also apply 5% VAT, 5% corporate tax. If you have to pay royalty for certain software, even for front or back office, then it depends on the kind of the royalty. If the right to use the software is given permanently to you without a limit of year, then VAT may not apply. But if the royalty, the right to use the software is given to your entity in Vietnam for certain periods of year, and it's renewable, then VAT will be 5%, corporate tax will be 10%. And for corporate tax, certain double tax treaty between Vietnam and other countries may help you to reduce or exempt the corporate tax, the CIT, corporate income tax. But that's how to apply the corporate tax in Vietnam. With the time being, I think I need to talk to you in another presentation. Okay, then I move to the double tax treaty among 27 countries in the EU. There are currently, there's about 22 countries already signing or already signed the double tax treaty, double tax agreement with Vietnam. I just list down, you can see most of the country already signed the double tax treaty. Of course, UK also already signed a double tax treaty with Vietnam. And you can asking me that withholding tax, in what case, in certain case, I say that withholding tax is not applicable. In certain case, I say that withholding tax will be applied. You can see that for certain expenses, withholding tax rate is quite high, 5% VAT, 5% corporate tax, or 5% VAT, 10% corporate tax. But for certain services, this will be either exempt or non-applicable. So what is an issue? The tax department will look onto the transaction to determine what is the proper, the right withholding tax rate to be applied. Of course, they will take a look on the documentation, the contract that you sign with the other parties. They also, for withholding tax, they not only based on the place of consumption, the country, the service to be consumption, but they also based on the place, the country, the service, the services are performed. Of course, they also want to see the fee breakdown to apply the proper tax rate to the particular fee. Tax department often challenge about what is the tax base to apply the withholding tax, because technically withholding tax needs to be applied on the gross amount, not on the net amount. Again, the surcharge is also very important, because international, outbound international, you can see that withholding tax will be 0 rated VAT and 3% VAT, but for surcharge, not all kind of surcharge can be considered as freight. Some of them may consider as normal services and subject to 5% VAT, 5% corporate tax. So they also want to know what is the surcharge. To apply for double tax treaty, of course, local tax want to know whether the foreign entity, they have the PE in Vietnam or not, the permanent establishment in Vietnam or not. And if you want to apply the double tax treaty to reduce the corporate tax, whether you file the DTA application properly within the allowed timing. So I make a similar table like what I already did in the slide mentioned about domestic VAT to understand the withholding tax treatment for the freighter. You need to take a look on the documentation. You need to take a look on the place where the services are performed and consumed. You need to know the fee breakdown. You need to know whether that's a gross or net amount. You need to know whether certain surcharge to be connected to the freight. If you want to apply the DTA, you need to make assessment whether the DTA can be applied. Handling services, certain question will be applied to work out what is the proper withholding tax rate. You need to know, to see the contract, you need to know the play of performance and consumption of the service subject to withholding tax. You want to know the tax base for that. If you want to apply the DTA, you need to know whether the foreign entity they create whether they create a P in Vietnam or not, and which DTA to be applied. Similar thing for the profit share. You also need to own kind of fact to know what is the proper withholding tax. The same with the management fee, and the same similar thing for royalty. Royalty, you also need to see what kind of right, know-how, secret, trademark, licensing to be transferred to the Vietnamese entity. So if let's say if we don't have such kind of information on our hand, we cannot tell you exactly what is withholding tax rate that you can apply. I can give you an overview with the very common rate to be applied, but whether the whole payment will be applied just the same rate, or there should be a breakdown of the fee and subject to different rate, whether the chance to apply the double tax treaty, we need to see the document. Okay, then I have another some recommendation. So within a limited hour, what I can bring to you is just give you an overview of what kind of revenue and the risk of subject to the VAT, and what is the common expense you pay to the overseas supplier entity, and what is the risk of withholding tax, and what is the fact need to be considered, study to work out the withholding tax. So now I move to the recommendation and advice. Of course, firstly, talking about the wider opening and wider application, of the industry, logistic industry under the EVFTA. You see that EVFTA now offering better and wider opportunity if compared to the WTO. So if you see the business opportunity in Vietnam, you may need to plan ahead about new collaboration, M&A, new joint venture. You also have to plan to increase the foreign capital to, you know, that expand the operation in Vietnam. You also need to think about the competition in the short future. So if you take a quicker action now than when the COVID and probably next year, then you already have more preparation for operating in Vietnam. For business process improvement, I also let's say we also have some suggestion about now that's the time to focus on the service quality improvement, because you know that the logistics and industry in Vietnam, I know that there are thousands of companies, but probably maybe 50 bigger companies already dominate the market. So if you plan for working with the EU client entity, customer, partner in the short future, you need to focus on the service quality. You need to improve and promote the usage of the IT in the logistic network. Not too many companies in Vietnam, they have very good IT platform for logistic activity. There are also requirements to join into the Logistic Enterprise Association to raise the same voice, to understand the legal framework, and to work out the proper solution, suggestion to the government to make the operation better and stronger. For tax purposes, I would suggestion you see that in the when I mentioned about the rates of domestic VAT, the difference between euro rated and 10%, and when I mentioned about withholding tax, so for apply the lower tax rate, to apply the exemption, to make sure that you don't have the you don't pay the higher tax in Vietnam. We review the service agreement because the tax law change from year to year. For certain service agreement you may have many years ago, so that's this is a time to review them, and you need to prepare many supporting documents. You can see that I mentioned about the fee breakdown, I mentioned about the gross and net fee, I mentioned about permanent establishment, I mentioned about the Double Tax Treaty, I mentioned about the play of performance, the play of consumption. So supporting document is very important to work with the tax authority to claim the lower tax rate. And you need to have the very good breakdown, what services to be consumed, perform in Vietnam, what services can perform overseas. For profit and loss share policy, you need to have a policy, clearer policy, and a detail how the profit and loss share are calculated. For tax planning, any application visit model, you need to have a very good tax planning to identify the tax rates and search, and you need to do some study to find out the tax saving opportunity. If your fee with customer is just lump sum amount, you need to work out, you need to separate the fee to see there are chance to apply the lower tax rate for certain fee component. And if you have to pay withholding tax, it's better for you to find out if they are chance to apply the double tax treaty, if withholding tax to be applied. I think my presentation already come to the end. I just have the one more slide to review how ASEAN can have client. We are the accounting, we are the auditing, tax and consulting firm. ASEAN, as you may know, we are ranked number 6 globally, and because I'm is one of the partner in charge of tax and consulting. So from tax and consulting side, particular for services relevant to logistics industry, we can do business model consulting, we can do licensing. We're very familiar with how to set up a logistics company in Vietnam, how to apply the CBC, how to compare between WTO and EVFTA to apply a better license for you to run the business into the new FTA in Vietnam. We can help you with the M&A activity, transaction support. We can do the logistics industry, tax training, advisory, tax review. We can do tax compliance, outsourcing, and of course the double tax treaty application. That is certain services that currently we offer to our logistics company operating in Vietnam. Okay, I think I finished my presentation, and I think this is the time for our Q&A.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Lam. It was very fruitful, your presentation, and it's very, what to say, very helpful for all our members. Well, I would like to invite our audience